Afternoon, depending on where you are located. I am Drew Clark, editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast, and I am not in Washington today, but I am in Provo, Utah, where there is an NTIA event on Broadband Confluence. Great name for an event that is taking place here. But obviously, we can't miss our town hall event on the Affordable Connectivity Program. It's a vital issue. Everyone's talking about it, and we have assembled a fabulous team to talk about it with us just now. But first, I want to remind everyone that Broadband Breakfast, we're all about better broadband, better lives. We believe in the infrastructure, but equally important is the application and use of that broadband, of that high capacity broadband. And obviously the Affordable Connectivity Program is very much in this realm, in this set of issues. We in addition to doing this Broadband Breakfast live online every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern time, so whether you're in California or Hawaii, and we have many people on the West Coast, which is why we do this at noon Eastern time, you can and should join us either on Zoom or on the streams, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. I also want to just give everyone a heads up reminder that we are doing a very special event. It's called the Made in America Summit. This is the third full day summit we've done. This one's going to be at the Samsung Executive Center at 700 Southeast Street, 700 Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast on Capitol Hill, right near Eastern Market. This is taking place on Tuesday, June 27th in Washington. We invite you to register and join. We have 3 more days of early bird discounts. So we hope those of you who are interested in this topic, which really is every topic, it's infrastructure, it's green energy, it's semiconductors, the high-tech competition with China that America is in the midst of. And so we hope to bring all these together in an exciting program. And we hope you'll go to broadbandbreakfast.com/MIAS for Made in America Summit to learn a little bit more about it. And as part of that, we're going to be having our session, our free Broadband Breakfast live online session next Wednesday, June 14th, on unpacking the CHIPS and Science Act. The CHIPS Act, of course, passed Congress in August last year, 10 months ago, brought a great deal of resources to bear on shoring up and enhancing America's semiconductor manufacturing. But 30 years ago, America had 40% of the semiconductor market. Now it's down to 12%. And so this landmark piece of legislation really goes hand in hand with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the green energy provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act. So we're going to be talking about all 3 of those on June 27th. And next week, we're going to talk specifically about CHIPS Act. And you can obviously go to broadbandbreakfast.com BBLO for Broadband Breakfast Live Online for all of our free Broadband Breakfast Live Online events. Lastly, I just want to give a shout out and a thanks to the sponsors of Broadband Breakfast. Without the sponsor support, we would not be able to do this free programming every Wednesday at 12 noon. The sponsors include Utopia Fiber, Broadband Money, Comcast, Nokia, the Comlaw Group, Google Fiber, Broadband Now, Ookla, Michael Baker International, Bitstream Communications, Positron Access, and the California Emerging Technology Fund. Thank you again to our sponsors for supporting us. All right, without any further ado, we are going to turn to our panel. I'm going to introduce them extremely briefly because I want to make way for a real legend in the broadband field, Blair Levin. He's been on all sides of the government, policy, industry, academia, and he has a very global perspective. So he's going to kick us off with the keynote address on the Affordable Connectivity Program, why it's important, what the issues are in play right now. And then we will turn to our panel to reflect on what he's told us and to field your questions, because that's one of the great things about the internet and live online events is we can take your feedback and your questions in real time. So our panel here, of course, is Blair, whom I've already introduced, just a little bit more about him as the senior fellow at Brookings Metro. He is also a policy analyst with New Street Research, and he's been involved in many, many different efforts to deepen broadband's reach and effectiveness, including executive director of Gig.U, the Next Generation Network Innovation Project, as well as working with the World Bank and the United Nations High Commission on Refugees on broadband for refugees. Most recently, he worked with the National Urban League to write the Lewis Latimer Plan for Digital Equity and Inclusion. So Blair, thank you. We're going to turn to you just now, but just to say a brief word about the rest of our panel, we'll hear from Adiyenka Ogulangan. Thank you for being with us, Adiyenka, and she is the Vice President and Government Affairs and Policy with Education Superhighway. And Education Superhighway has done incredible work. We look forward to hearing about how ACP impacts Education Superhighway. She'll be followed by Amina Fazula, who is the Senior Director of Equity Policy at Common Sense. I guess it's just Common Sense now. It used to be Common Sense Media, right?
Common Sense Media, you got it.
Common Sense Media, okay, great. Common Sense Media, which is really quite helpful. I've used it a lot as a parent, trying to understand, what's good and what's not good on the internet and in media. And we're going to hear how Common Sense is impacted by the Affordable Connectivity Program. We will then hear from Umo Naik, who is the Vice President for Government. He's the Government Affairs Executive and Public Policy Lawyer. And his official title is Senior Vice President of Public Policy and Community Engagement for Ting Internet. So again, we get to hear from a provider who's deep in the weeds of talking about the importance of the Affordable Connectivity Program. And then batting cleanup, we're going to hear from Joey Wender. Thank you for being a part of this, Joey. Joey is, I used to say there's a broadband troika of the FCC, NTIA, and U.S. Department of Agriculture's Rural Utility Service. Now it's a quad, like it's the Fabulous Four instead of the dynamic trio, right? And Joey is really one of the key, if not the key, broadband policy executive at the Treasury Department, and he is the director of the U.S. Department of the Treasury's Capital Projects Fund, which has kind of been first out of the gate with a lot of broadband funding. So we'll hear a little bit more about Treasury's role and thoughts on the Affordable Connectivity Program. All right, enough in intros. Blair, let's turn it over to you to hear why the Affordable Connectivity Program is at such a pivotal moment right now in time.
Thank you very much, Drew, and I very much look forward to the conversation with all of the panelists. Drew, you said that ACP is a vital issue. I'm going to say it's much more than that. In fact, I would say it's the single most important policy issue in telecommunications in terms of its impact on the largest number of Americans and its long-term impact on the economy and society. To set the stage for that, I want to go back 90 years when FDR said, "I see 1/3 of a nation ill-housed." And he did something great to address that problem. He created the Federal Housing Authority, an institution that made it easier for Americans to obtain mortgages. The authority also, however, did something horrible. It restricted lending to African-American neighborhoods, and the impact has been devastating and long-lasting. It's one of the reasons we have an incredible wealth gap by race. As the Washington Post reported, since housing equity is about 2/3 of median household wealth, excluding Black Americans from establishing equity during a time of unprecedented rises in home values, locked in and exacerbated wealth disparities. Now let's project forward. Wealth creation in this century's global information economy will require digital access and skills. So just as restricting home ownerships 90 years ago still causes negative reverberations for us today, if restrictions on digital adoption were allowed to continue, it would weaken our economy and society for generations to come. This has been clear at least since 2010, when the National Broadband Plan found that the cost of digital exclusion is large and growing. Congress understood that and built that into the infrastructure bill, talking about how it is absolutely essential for individuals to be able to participate in the society and economy, to have access to the internet. And Congress correctly sought to address that problem by funding both the access gap in the BEAD program and the capital project program that Joey runs, and the affordability gap through the ACP. But here's the thing, the ACP is about to run out of money. It's probably going to run out first or second quarter of next year. And that risks disconnecting about 50 million Americans who currently benefit from the program. This would constitute the biggest step any country has ever taken to widen rather than close the digital divide. Now, the damage to those 50 million Americans alone is justification for refunding. And I think several of our panelists could talk about that. I want to talk for a second about some other problems that would cause. It would create problems for the BEAD program, which is critical to getting networks everywhere. Amina Common Sense, working with the consulting group BCG, studied the impact of the ACP on the BEAD program and concluded that ACP reduces the necessary subsidy to deploy networks in rural areas by about 25% per household. So if ACP disappears next year, the federal dollars that we've allocated to BEAD will end up deploying to significantly fewer unserved and underserved locations. And so that's going to create problems. Further, and I've been working with some states on this, there's a good requirement that the grantees of those programs offer an affordable service. If we have the ACP, it's a pretty simple problem to solve. If we don't have the ACP, it will cause massive confusion. States will do a lot of different things. And so that will also increase the cost and lower the effectiveness of the BEAD program and other things. Now, I think in normal times, it would not be too big a political lift to refund this program. Though I would say Joey knows a lot more about congressional politics than I do, and so I look forward to his thoughts on that. And I just want to point out that in terms of impact, it is the most bipartisan program that Congress has ever enacted. Now, I haven't studied every single one they've enacted, but when you break down the benefits by congressional districts represented by Republicans and Democrats, one finds that in terms of the dollars delivered, the enrolled households, and the percent of the district enrolled in the program, the numbers are almost identical. It's 50-50. Polling numbers also suggest strong bipartisan support, with a poll this year showing 78% of the voters supported continuing the ACP, including 64% of Republicans, 70% of independents, and 95% of Democrats. Yet, we all know about the current budget politics, and that makes refunding a very difficult battle. To date, neither the Democrats nor Republicans have called for refunding in their budgets. There have been no hearings specifically dedicated to refunding ACP, though it has come up in a number of hearings. I just want to point out that the FCC sent a letter, all 4 commissioners, asking Congress to restore the auction authority. Now, I agree with that request, but here's the point. It's not that urgent. There is no spectrum for the FCC that they're about to auction. And I think that auction authority will be reestablished before the FCC has a spectrum that can auction. But we are rapidly approaching a time when 50 million Americans with little or no discretionary income will either face a huge increase in their broadband bill or potentially be cut off. And yet we don't see a similar kind of bipartisan letter from the FCC. So that should cause us, I think, all to be very concerned. Let me close this way. Roosevelt, after describing the 1/3 ill-housed as well as ill-fed and ill-clothed America, went on to say, "But it is not in despair that I paint you that picture. I paint it for you in hope, because the nation, seeing and understanding the injustice in it, proposes to paint it out. We are determined to make every American citizen the subject of his country's interest and concern." Now, Roosevelt was a great president, accomplished many great things. We should share his hope. But we should also understand how his administration did not live up to that vision of making every American citizen the subject of his or her country's interest and concern. We cannot make the same mistake today. It is time for us to paint out the digital divide. And to do that, we either need to refund the ACP or find an acceptable alternative that makes it available and affordable to all Americans. Thank you very much, and I look forward to our discussion.
It happens to us all. We go on mute and then we don't remember to unmute. Thank you very much, Blair. That was right on time, and it definitely set the stage for us. Now we're going to turn to each of our panel, have an opportunity to hear just brief remarks, about 3 minutes or so, about your thoughts on the ACP, what Blair has said, and then we'll kind of move into our roundtable discussion in this town hall meeting. Go ahead, Adienka. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Drew. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Again, my name is Adienka Ogunwaga. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs at Education Superhighway. Our mission is to close the broadband affordability gap, to make sure that the 17 million households that have access to broadband where they live but can't afford to connect can actually get online. Our goal is to make sure that income is no longer a determination of connectivity. And thankfully, we do have the Affordable Connectivity Program, and we've invested a lot of resources in increasing awareness and increasing enrollment in the ACP by partnering with states. Drew mentioned that you're in Utah. Utah is one of our partners, launching a statewide ACP campaign today as part of their Confluence. We've also partnered with cities and trusted institutions to overcome the awareness, trust, and enrollment barriers that initially prevented a lot of folks from getting online through the ACP. We've created a whole host of free resources for our partners at all levels. Our Promote ACP Resource Hub provides collateral and marketing materials for everyone. We have a Learn ACP training course to support our community partners and those on the ground, providing direct enrollment support. And we also launched a Get ACP pre-enrollment tool to help folks navigate the process and understand what they need before applying with the National Verifier. Through our work, as Blair said, and the work of a number of other stakeholders, 18.2 million households have successfully enrolled in the ACP. And I think it's important to not couch that as only 18.2 million households have enrolled. We know that a number of almost 50 million households are eligible for the benefit, but it's no small feat to achieve 18.2 million households enrolling in this program in less than a year. And we're poised to see awareness of the program grow. We're poised to see enrollment in the program grow as the FCC is now awarding ACP outreach grants. The Your Home, Your Internet pilot that we are also participating in is getting off the ground. All of these local organizations that we work with, that we have empowered to be the trusted messengers to get people signed up for the ACP, are doing that critical work. But the lack of certainty around the funding is a major source of concern. Myself and my colleagues at Education Superhighway, we field questions every day from our partners. Why should I encourage families to sign up for the ACP if money's going to run out? Why should I invest time and resources in training my staff and applying for grant funding if money is going to run out? And as Blair said, there doesn't seem to be a sense of urgency from Congress to provide that certainty to states, to local leaders, and to the trusted institutions that are doing that work, and that the FCC has empowered all of us to do, really. So we're beginning to apply that pressure by signing on to letters, meeting with key lawmakers. But we know that these households need the assurance now that the benefit isn't going to disappear. The digital equity community needs this assurance, as well as ISPs and other stakeholders. And we're eager to participate in applying that pressure to make sure we get that certainty.
Thank you so much. And thank you for sticking to the time. Let's turn now to Amina. Tell us a little bit about Common Sense Media and how you approach this issue.
Thank you, Drew. So excited to be here with this wonderful panel. And Blair, thanks for lifting up our research, our most recent research on the connection between ACP and BEAD. At Common Sense Media, we're deeply committed to making sure that families, kids, and teachers have the resources they need to really use technology to the best of its ability in a safe and healthy way. And so you might be wondering, why are we engaged in broadband? And that's because for the first time ever, we have an opportunity to have every family in the country connected to the internet. And that is incredibly meaningful. And at Common Sense, we've been working for decades on making sure that when you're connected to the internet, you can use it safely and in a healthy way. So we've been deeply engaged in making sure that we get the word out on ACP to make sure that kids and families get access to the program. And once they have access to the program, that they have access to the digital inclusion materials that they need to thrive. And over the past few years, we've been doing some research to get a better understanding of what it means for families to be able to have access to the internet. And in the course of our research, we found that when a student stays disconnected to the internet, they'll have a lower GPA, about 0.4 lower, which results in a lower annual income over their lifetime. And that results in about $33 billion in annual GDP loss, plus additional public costs that we all pay for when we don't connect a student. So there is a long-term gap and a significant impact on earnings and on the economy at large. We've also found that right now, the average speeds of internet usage has grown about 8 times since 2012. So it's even more important for families to have access to the internet, but support so that they can access internet that can actually be utilized in a way that benefits education, benefits jobs, benefits healthcare access, and all the other myriad supports that they can gain by using the internet in a robust way. We found that families are starting to increasingly use technology for video conferencing, for working in the cloud, to be able to access materials, museums, experiences virtually, to be able to access tutoring, to be able to access face-to-face engagement with other resources, therapists, et cetera. And we're also finding that as Blair mentioned, that there is a significant connection between the ACP and deployment. We're excited to see BEAD be able to go into communities where they've been left behind, either in the quality of service that their community experiences or any service at all. And we know that just bringing the technology into their community isn't enough. Making sure that those community members have access to affordability makes all the difference in being able to actually take advantage of what is brought into their community. And then finally, what we're finding is that there are savings for families that range well beyond just education, but also with respect to things like healthcare. We found that the cost of healthcare access goes down, but also the usage of healthcare goes up. So families will be able to reach out to their healthcare providers more frequently and have a better relationship and hopefully better healthcare outcomes. For all these reasons, we've been so excited for supporting the promotion of the ACP, and we're deeply concerned about the impending cliff of this funding. We really want to make sure that there's an opportunity for Congress to support additional funding. And in the next year, we have unique opportunities where we can do some long-term funding, 5-year or 1-year funding horizons, which would be really supportive of the ACP program. We can discuss that more later.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amina. Let's now turn to Amol Naik. Thank you for bringing the ISP perspective and tell us how you see the Affordable Connectivity Program.
Absolutely. Thank you all for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Amol Naik. I'm Senior Vice President for Public Policy and Community Engagement for Ting Internet. So we're an internet service provider. This is about 20 different markets, including, for those of you in Washington, just across the Potomac, we're building out Alexandria, Virginia right now. We're a bit unique in that we utilize lots of different sort of deployment models. One is organic, where we build, own, and operate the network, such as in Alexandria. We also have situations where we are the anchor tenant on a municipal built network. So right now, the biggest project we have going in that regard is we're the anchor tenant for the Colorado Springs Utilities project. We also often lease city fiber backbone to extend the network. And we're doing that in places like Culver City, California. And then finally, we lease fiber backbones from private partners. And we recently announced a partnership with an entity called Ubiquity in Arizona in that regard. So in terms of ACP, it's such a critical program, as our panelists have already laid out. I mean, from an ISP perspective, a few observations. So one, we are very proud that we are now in Alexandria being the first market, but ultimately will be throughout our network nationally, offering a symmetrical gig to folks who qualify for ACP, right? So what our hope is there is that we can achieve digital equity. We view the internet as something that is basic and needed for everyone, just as you wouldn't think about, whether you can use your dishwasher, refrigerator, and television at the same time. We believe that the internet should be the same way for everyone of all income levels. And so that symmetrical gig ACP offering is starting in Alexandria, but will be expanded. Blair also touched on this, but from an ISP perspective, and I think it was Amina's good work at Common Sense, BEAD is very much a capital expenditures program, as we know, right? It is critical in utilizing CapEx to get to otherwise non-commercially viable areas. Well, ACP really helps on the other side of the ledger, which is the operating expenses, the OpEx, right? Because without that certainty of having $30 a month for folks who qualify for ACP, I think the stat was a 25% increase without ACP for BEAD funded projects. That makes complete sense to me. From an ISP perspective, having that certainty of the $30 a month is critical. It's a real shame that this is even a topic of conversation and something that isn't a no-brainer. I think all of us would agree that renewing ACP is absolutely essential, because it really is one of the last bipartisan issues that we have in America. When you hear those numbers that Blair put out there, I grew up in rural North Carolina, the kind of place where folks unfortunately are still doing their homework in McDonald's parking lots, because that's the only place that they can access the internet, and it just isn't right in 2023 in America. And so proud to be working at Ting Internet, where digital inclusion is a key focus of what we're doing, really trying to achieve digital equity, and we couldn't be more supportive of the ACP being renewed.
Well, thank you. And let's turn it to you, Joey. Tell us how you at Treasury and Capital Projects Fund look at this particular.
Great. Thanks, Drew. And thanks for putting together such a really terrific panel here today. And I always appreciate the opportunity to talk about the importance of the ACP. So the program that I run here at Treasury, the Capital Projects Fund, which provides $10 billion for connectivity, the vast majority of which will be going towards broadband infrastructure, was the first major federal program to require any provider that takes our money to participate in the ACP. So in many ways, the ACP is the linchpin that holds all of these infrastructure programs together, BEAD, capital projects, and elsewhere. If you're going to try to achieve equity and you're going to overcome, the adoption gap, right, you have to address affordability. You have to. And that's why we are proud to be partnering with the FCC and requiring all providers that take our money to participate in the affordability program. And so, the previous speaker just spoke about it. All of you just spoke about it, but there is a cascading effect if the ACP goes away. There is this underlying codependency, I should say. Blair talked about it as well at the top. In many ways, I'd like to believe my program is the single most important broadband program. It is not. It is the ACP. The ACP is the thing that is the glue that holds all this together, that makes equity possible, that makes adoption possible for all Americans. And so the cascading effect is not just about how terrible it would be to rip away internet from millions, potentially tens of millions of homes, but also there's an impact on the provider side that the previous speaker just talked about in terms of OpEx, right? We're providing capital expenditures, as is the BEAD program. And so the ACP is absolutely essential. And I want to just make it very clear, as someone who works in the Treasury Department and runs a large broadband program, it would be the largest to date, but for the fact that there's a $42 billion program that was created just a few months after this. We have to renew the ACP. There is no other alternative here. It has to be renewed. It has to be extended. It has to be funded in full. And so I'm looking forward to all of the questions from Drew, from your audience here. So thanks for having me.
Well, thank you. And let's open it up again for those of you who are watching on either Zoom or any of the other platforms. We can take your questions on other platforms too. We're getting some here in Zoom. Let me just start off. It seems like the point is now kind of really seeping into the popular consciousness that Affordable Connectivity Program is not just a OpEx program from the point of funding and keeping the program going, but it's a CapEx program for capital expenditures, because many ISPs cannot pencil their builds in without being able to count on that $30 a month payment, which again, we're all uncertain it's going to continue. So I would just like to ask Amol and others to speak to that specific point. How does having that affordable connectivity program, guarantee affect the ability to plan out builds, whether through BEAD or through builds that are not connected to BEAD?
Well, yeah, it's transformative, frankly. I mean, not only with BEAD funding, but when you're using private capital as well, right? So even for an ISP like ours, when we want to go to underserved areas, it pencils out in a much more significant way when you have that guaranteed $30 a month. You strip ACP out of there, and the financial models are completely different. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's important that ACP, in addition to the fact that ripping internet access and opportunity away from tens of millions of Americans would be ruinous on many levels, it really also prevents capital, private and, BEAD funding, federal funding, from being utilized in a way that would ensure digital inclusion. The ripple effects, as a number of people have said here, are tremendous.
Blair or Adienka or Amina, do you want to speak?
I'll just quickly say, the thing that often people don't understand is that the capital projects programs, they don't fund 100% of the CapEx. They fund the difference between the CapEx that is necessary and what the private sector would, with the private sector return, be willing to pay for that project. So if it'll cost 10 million, but you could only get a return that would justify an investment of 3 million, then you have a gap of 7. But if you have the ACP, then you might be willing to fund 4 million, so you have a gap of 6. So that's where the difference comes in, it's a huge difference. And by the way, it's going to cause, the fact that Congress hasn't acted and there's no certainty is causing huge headaches in the 50 states as they do their planning, and also with all the ISPs who are about to start bidding on these projects and have to make a guess, which is, usually when they do economic modeling for a government program, they're very sophisticated. They've done this before. They're willing to do this, but you have this big uncertainty where you're kind of like betting as if you would in Las Vegas, where what is Congress going to do? And if you bet the wrong way, if you're a small ISP and you bet the wrong way, you can go bankrupt. On the other hand, if you assume that there won't be funding, but other people assume there will be funding, you'll get beat in the bid. So it creates enormous problems in the program that we don't have certainty.
We've got a question from our audience about, making the point, and it's, there's no doubt we are preaching to the choir. I think everyone on this call is interested in broadband. So we sort of understand that that's not the problem. But this questioner does ask, why should we be or why does the FCC continue promoting the benefit in such a robust way if there's a chance it won't be refunded? That is kind of at the heart of the point that Adienka, you made earlier. What do our panelists think about this paradox we're in? Should we be promoting the Affordable Connectivity Program or not, given the uncertainty hanging?
I think that's a great question, but we also have to understand the FCC's mandate to administer the program, and it is contingent and tied to so many other things. And Congress saw the need for it coming out of the pandemic to address broadband affordability. That need has not disappeared, and it will not disappear. So I think it would be disingenuous to tell the FCC to pause on promoting the program, and all of the organizations that are receiving their grant funding and have invested time and resources and effort in making sure that people finally have an opportunity to get online and participate in the digital economy. That is the ultimate goal. And rather than point the finger at the FCC, I think we should all be having those conversations with Congress to impress upon them that this is urgent for us. This is urgent for not only the households that qualify for the program, but as all of the stakeholders that are gathered here. And we need the certainty before the end of the year, before we reach that cliff, that the ACP will be sustained.
And I mean, I would add that that uncertainty extends beyond the sort of infrastructure context as well. So for institutions to plan for the next school year, for example, educators have had the support of the ACP. They're looking at another school year where it might peter out in the midst of the school year. What does that mean for how they plan, for how they deliver their curriculum? What type of resources can they offer after school? What type of supports can they offer? So this is really important to get right, because there's a cascading effect on critical institutions that support families as well.
There's
If
a
I could
great
just add-
question. Oh, please go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just add very quickly. Look, I'm a veteran of 2 terms stints at the FCC. I deeply believe in the institution, but marketing is not its core competency. That's not really what it does. And I'm glad it's doing the things it's doing, but let's face it, if we really want to market this program, it goes through the ISPs. But the problem is, if you sit in the shoes or you stand in the shoes of the ISPs, they are looking at the prospects that for every family they bring on, they may need to send them a notice saying your internet fees are about to go up by $30 or we're going to have to disconnect you. That is going to cause enormous problems, bad publicity, chaos. The companies don't want to do that. So the companies, I think they're acting in good faith, but they're not marketing the way they would if they knew that this program was going to exist for at least another 3 to 5 years. And so that's a fundamental problem. Again, glad the FCC is doing it, but they're not the critical marketers here, and the critical marketers have mixed motives.
Jim Thompson asks this question: with the current monthly rate of additions, we could have 23 to 24 million households on ACP by the time of funding exhaustion. This is more than 80 million Americans. Are any of you aware of any analysis on the impact, loss of broadband, economic loss due to lack of broadband if funding is not renewed?
I mean, I don't have an exact number on the ACP impact, but I can tell you that we did analysis that shows that when you leave students unconnected, you have about a $33 billion hit to the GDP annually. And that's just students.
Hit again.
Right?
What's that number again you just mentioned?
So when you leave students unconnected, which let's say there's about 16 million students that we've estimated are persistently unconnected. If you leave those students unconnected, there's about a $33 billion hit to the GDP annually.
Okay, thank you. We get questions are coming in fiercely, so I'm going to default to more questions, but feel free to raise your hand or indicate you want to chime in. Well, this question from Scott Quinn has come in. For advocates in Washington, D.C., are there both Democrats and Republican members that are working on legislation to further fund or extend ACP? Are there opportunities for advocacy in Washington to convey the urgency? Who would like to take that one?
Well, I'll take it and make a political observation that I don't mean in a partisan way. The barrier to this program being refunded is on the Republican side. I mean, if the Democrats are going to most likely propose to continue refunding it, I don't think there's any problem there. And so the question is, in the current situation where you have the Democrats controlling the Senate, and likely to include it in their budget proposals, but the Republicans controlling the House, what happens? It is great that Republicans like former FCC Commissioner O'Reilly, have endorsed refunding and said there's a conservative justification for doing so, and a number of other conservatives have done so. But I would just say, as a political observer, I have not seen that translated into Republican House members or senators coming out for refunding, and hopefully that changes.
And I'd add to Blair's comment that, just on the face, I think it's because we're talking about funding, it's critical that people reach out to appropriators. So House Republicans that are in appropriation are going to be in a very powerful position to make these decisions.
Ada, just to add another point to this, in terms of opportunities for advocacy, there are a lot of trade associations now. Increasingly, you see month by month on some of these calls that I'm sure we're all on, an increased sort of urgency in advocating here. And I think Blair's read of the politics are absolutely right. It's indisputable. That's sort of how it lays out. And if you look at, there's a lot of folks in deep red rural districts utilizing ACP. So just as someone who has worked in politics and in political campaigns, my thought is, gosh, it's going to be hard for those members to go back to their districts and their town halls when you take away people's internet. I mean, I think that message getting to folks, I've been engaged in some conversations with folks on the Republican side of the aisle, and uniformly, people seem pretty surprised by how utilized it is in their districts, right? I think there may be a misconception that it's somehow sort of an urban program, which it very much is not, right? It's very bipartisan, it's urban and it's rural. And, that message just needs to get to the right ears. But from a political standpoint, gosh, I would hate to go back to my district and have to explain why people's free internet was stripped away.
It never ceases to amaze how many ways the U.S. can mess up its budgetary system. We have this debt ceiling and narrowly avoided a catastrophe when the two houses got together and passed a compromise, right, with the president signing it. Then every year we play another game of chicken. September 30th, which is inevitably kicked the end of the fiscal year. It's inevitably kicked multiple months. I don't believe it's ever in my lifetime been passed by September 30th, right? And then we have programs like this, right, which seem to be important. Now, I want to throw in a caveat or a question for each of you, which is the plus of the way the Universal Service Fund has been funded thus far is that it is a process that the FCC kind of controls directly and hasn't had to rely on general appropriations. When the Universal Service Fund was effectively expanded, again, I know it's technically not the same program, but they're serving the kind of needs that the Universal Service Fund was designed to achieve. We suddenly have a different conversation. And Jason Hardebeck asks the question, is there any appetite in Congress to look at alternate sources of funding? Jason's raising another issue, which is not kind of on the table yet, which is talking about how emergency room visits in hospitals are reduced by telehealth, right? Prescribing internet access could ultimately end up paying for itself in savings through telehealth and improved health outcomes. So that's an out-of-the-box suggestion. But I want to ask, in addition to the out-of-box suggestion, the in-the-box boring suggestion, should ACP be funded by some kind of universal service fund like fee? And I'd love everyone's take on this question.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I definitely think looking at USF reform will probably be part of the conversation about the future of the ACP and sustaining it long term. I don't think that that's off the table, nor should it be off the table, given the prolific nature and the mandate to connect every household. I'm just concerned about having that conversation as we are also approaching this funding cliff conversation, and whether or not the two can happen at the same time to ensure the funding for the ACP for another year, 3 years, 3 to 5 years, as Amina said. I don't want the urgency of the need to have certainty right now to get lost in whether or not it's USF reform or some other funding mechanism to sustain the program long term. We can have both conversations, and there are probably going to be opposition to broadening USF, but I think our primary focus should be making sure that there's certainty around funding for the ACP, and then tinkering with what that funding mechanism is long term.
Thank you for that response. It kind of gets to the heart of the question, but again, let's hear other people's thoughts on this.
I'll go next. A couple of things. First of all, Jason's suggestion, actually, you referred to work I did with the National Urban League in the Latimer Plan. In that, we proposed that Medicaid could essentially fund, this was November of 2020, could essentially fund something similar to the ACP by giving vouchers to Medicaid recipients who didn't have broadband. There was almost no doubt that Medicaid as an insurance company would save money if it has everybody online. And that emergency room stat that Jason referred to is just one of many different ways that having telehealth capabilities saves money for Medicaid. It's a different way of looking at the problem, and I think an appropriate one, but given the timing, I don't see that happening quickly. And so we need to act in the way that is kind of the simplest and fastest, and Congress renewing it. As to the Universal Service Fund, I would just note there are certain legal challenges to the current system. The next one to be argued in the 11th Circuit on June 21st. I don't think those challenges will succeed, but they are very significant cases. And if the courts in those circuits, or the 5th, 6th, and 11th Circuit, or if the case goes to the Supreme Court, we could find that the FCC's current structure falls apart. But I would just note that Congress in the Infrastructure Act asked the FCC to give it a vision of what universal service should be after the infrastructure bill programs have spent all their money. The FCC issued a report, suggested that there were a number of different proceedings that should start. It hasn't started any of those yet. And I think going into a presidential election year, it's unlikely to do so in a way that has much of an impact, which I think is unfortunate. I think that in a very bipartisan way, we do need to reform universal service. There are certain kind of economic challenges to it. There are legal challenges to it. There are political challenges to it. But clearly coming out of the BEAD program, the capital projects program, whatever happens with ACP, there needs to be a real significant rethink of universal service. But the fundamental vision of making it accessible and affordable to all, that should not be on the table. We should just find the most practical, politically sellable ways of doing that.
Drew, I'd only want to add this, and as an executive branch official, I'm not going to make any assessments or directives on what Congress should or should not do in terms of the long-term health of the Universal Service Fund or how you fund the ACP. What I will say is this observation, is having worked on the Hill for 13 years and in my current job, is we don't have until mid next year to fund the ACP. Right? Everyone keeps talking, well, it'll run out of money at some point next year. We really have until the end of this calendar year to fund the ACP. And I say that for two reasons. One is, as we all see how Congress works, there are only a few must-pass bills, right? At end of the year appropriation bill, the Defense Act, a farm bill. I mean, there are only a few bills in which this could essentially ride along. And so if we reach 2024 and the ACP has not been fully funded or renewed, we've got a real big problem. The other issue I would say, and this has been alluded to by many folks on this panel today, is we don't want to get into a situation where providers and states are having to figure out okay, how am I going to notify households that this subsidy is going to end? We don't need or want to get to the edge of the cliff. We want to be far away from the cliff when we fund this, okay? So I think folks need to be, and I've been saying this to providers, I've been saying this to stakeholders, and I've been saying this publicly. We need to reset our deadline for essentially at the latest, the end of the year to provide this funding, or unless we are in really dire straits.
I want to hear Amina and Amol's perspective on this. I also want to get some more questions. So, do you have any quick thoughts you'd like to say on linkage to USF or not, Amina?
The contribution reform efforts for USF are happening in tandem. So, of course, I think it's an important conversation to be a part of. We should be able to walk and chew gum. So, maybe there's a long-term option for an affordability program or ACP-like component in the USF at that point. But that's a discussion to have. I don't think, like Joy pointed out, we've got time to wait for the whole contribution reform process to play out. It's been happening for many years. I don't know, Blair, how long have you been talking about this? So, I think it's critical that we move quickly.
Yeah, very quickly, couldn't agree more. Speed is really what matters here in the short term. The longer term conversation should be had, but I think everyone has expressed their urgency that hopefully Congress begins to feel by the end of this year.
Well, maybe I have to push back a little bit because I think the point has been made. They're working in tandem. It's kind of inconceivable they aren't going to get discussed together. A great question from Daniel Smith is Affordable Connectivity Program can replace much of the ECF money going to schools, the emergency going to schools. That's obviously a fund that's kind of built on or built kind of in tandem with the Universal Service Fund. I guess I'm gonna, again, push back a little bit. How does this happen? Like, if you're talking about getting this in a must-pass bill, Joey, which I think is quite sound advice, is there a way to do it without? Blair said it's in the Republicans' court. So, do we have enough Republicans who are going to support this? Another commenter raised the need to link it to rural issues, which is totally true. But I'd love some more feedback or thoughts on this strategically. What should be done to assuage Republicans' concerns about this if it is to happen by this year?
So let me just get back to the point on USF. I think Blair mentioned this, but there are legal considerations to including an affordability program of this scale and size and with the goal that the ACP has within the USF. It would be difficult. Arguably, it's possible, but I think there are arguments to be made on either side of whether or not the FCC could move ahead on its own, knowing that there is this mandated process that's happening and Congress is considering contribution reform. It will be a long process. So I don't know that, yes, it's happening at the same time and that we're talking about these things right now, but I would assume that USF contribution reform process will continue on through the end of the year. And so that's not a really great vehicle if we're talking about trying to get this done before the end of the year.
The only thing I would add to that, Drew, is I think the most important thing to keep in mind for everybody on this call and everybody that cares about the ACP is we need to be forming, and all the pieces are in place, a large and loud coalition asking for more money. One of the brilliances of the ACP is it has brought together providers, nonprofits, states, federal agencies, stakeholders across the gamut that all have the same tune of, we need to fund this. The louder and bigger that coalition is, and the bigger and the more focus there is on that ask, this will get sorted out by lawmakers on the Hill. There's always, particularly in these larger bills, there's always lots of gives and takes. I don't exactly know how the sausage will be made, but it's important that all of us say as loudly as possible of this must be in the sausage. We'll leave the sausage making till later in the year, but that's what's got to be most important, because we think this is the most important thing. These are the issues that we all work about. The same in every single sector, right? On every single issue, there's a call going on about, God, we need to have more money for X, Y, and Z. And in some ways, that's what we're competing against. And so we need to make sure that this coalition is as loud as possible. Otherwise, it upends the entire effort to have affordable, reliable, high-speed internet for all Americans.
I'm going to throw some more monkeys in the wrench, or and we don't need to stop right at one. We have kind of allocate a little more time for this. We know it's an important topic, and we'll plan to go at least another 10, 15 minutes unless I hear objections in chat message or otherwise. This great question from Dr. Ron Suarez comes in about how after receiving the application ID from USAC, the Universal Service Administration Company, he mentions a company, Comcast chatbot, keeps indicating how to apply for the Affordable Connectivity Program, but apparently the bot has not been programmed to tell you where you can submit verification of your approval. I don't want to get into necessarily the specifics of one company's interactions, but I would like to address this question about how easy is it, or has it been, to apply for the Affordable Connectivity Program. I've heard lots of complaints about that, but I'm not hearing as many. So I don't know if that means it's improved. I'd love, Amol, yours thoughts on that, and as well as Yinka and Amina, how do you see on the ground the ease with which ACP can be funded?
Well, so in terms of signing up for ACP, it's not an easy process, right? It's a laborious process. It takes quite some time. You have to have a certain level of sophistication generally in order to do this. And so, and it's a real challenge, to get folks to sign up. So I don't know that perhaps it's improved on the margins, but fundamentally it is difficult. The way we've tried to tackle the difficult problem is to work with digital navigators, folks that are, embedded in the communities and have been in the communities for a long time. That seems to have given us the best results, but it is a laborious process to get folks to sign up. And that's not to mention, right, not everyone wants to self-identify themselves to the federal government, right? Not everyone wants to, or there's a huge lack of trust. There's all kinds of other reasons people may not want to engage with the government. And so there are some real barriers there.
Yeah, and in addition to like the awareness and trust barriers, just signing up, as Amol said, is challenging. We've seen that it takes 30 to 45 minutes for the average person to get through the National Verifier application. And that time increases if they have to upload documentation. So that's one of the reasons, was the impetus behind us creating our getacp.org tool to sort of simplify that process on the front end, to help folks understand how they qualify, to support digital navigators that are helping people navigate the process ahead of time, and then also making sure that they come to the National Verifier application with the documentation that they need ahead of time. We know that the administration has recently launched some enhancements to the National Verifier process to streamline that a little bit, but we're still seeing that it does take quite a bit of time. And if you are not digitally literate, you still need support to get through the process and then ultimately connect to an ISP. A lot of people, even when they're successful in getting through the application, making that next step connection to actually connecting with a provider is still a challenge.
We've got a question from Facebook.
Drew, can I just really quickly?
Yeah, go ahead, Taylor.
We should all understand what's really happening here. The FCC and the carriers would like to make it as simple as possible, but there's always a congressional criticism, which in some ways is valid, that we have to make sure there's not waste, fraud, and abuse. And part of the challenge of administering the program is to try to make it easy while at the same time making sure that there's, that you're not signing up people who don't belong. So that's a challenge. Now, by the way, 5 years from now, artificial intelligence, I hope, will solve this and many other what we might think of as customer service problems. But for our purposes, that's not going to happen soon enough. So it's a hard problem.
We've got a question. We got a question from Facebook. David Jimenez is asking, he's agreeing with your point, Blair, about ACP moving forward and not overburdening this process by putting it on the back burner. However, he does ask, could not Affordable Connectivity Program, among other issues, be used as a way to push momentum forward on USF reform and get us where we should be in terms of broadband as a whole, cementing ACP and broadband, especially for rural America, once and for all? What are your reactions to that? Any of our panelists, Blair, and any of our panelists?
The answer is yes. I mean, look, I don't want to cast aspersions on any particular individuals, but of course, it is actually somewhat surprising to me that there has not been a congressional hearing about the future of universal service yet. I mean, we are spending as a federal government, roughly speaking, approximately $100 billion in ways to achieve universal service goals. If you look at capital projects and you look at BEAD and you look at some other programs, that's extraordinary. But I don't see coming from either the Congress or the FCC the energy and the vision and the analysis, maybe most importantly, the analysis of what universal service should be. And I don't want to blame any individuals, but for that to happen, there has to be a certain kind of leadership that has not been demonstrated to date.
Doreen Cornwall asks, more out of the box, besides the Medicaid point earlier, is anyone modeling changed impact on transportation systems if internet access reduces the need for travel, urban and rural? Any thoughts or reactions to Doreen?
I mean, I'll say there's a lot of research being done, us included, to understand the myriad impacts of having access and how it benefits other institutions and other important activities to the economy and just to society. You know, the more that we can lift up these connections, I think the better off we'll all be. And when we sit down and talk to folks on the Hill, especially, you know, that said, I think even if all you do is call leadership on the Hill and say simply, we need more funding for ACP and we need it before the end of the year, I think that is a very powerful message to bring, even if you don't come armed with a number of statistics on economic analysis.
Henry Goldberg asked this question. The ACP seems not to be well coordinated with other aspects of digital equity, access to devices, digital literacy, skills training, tech support. Do you all agree with that question by Henry? And have you? And he says he's heard that most of the households signed up for ACP already have internet service. So reactions to this question, comment by Henry Goldberg.
Well, I mean, the program is 18 months old and counting. So, you know, of course, the vast majority of the people who signed up first will be the ones who already had service. That doesn't speak to whether or not they actually need the support. You know, they'll be either income eligible or eligible through some mechanism. It's keeping them connected that matters, right? These can be families that go on and off. You know, and in terms of, you know, access to digital equity supports, the ACP does have a device program embedded within it. You know, I don't know that that's the sort of the best piece of the ACP program, but it is there. It was a consideration during the creation of the program. You know, there may be better ways to do that. However, I think what the ACP has done, which we've never had before, is the opportunity to talk about digital inclusion at the moment that somebody is finally getting affordability support. And so we can couple that. And that's something that Common Sense has been doing in our ACP outreach. When we speak to folks about the ACP, we then follow up with, you know, and do you need support so that you can go online safely? What are your concerns about privacy, about cyberbullying, about scams online, about how to navigate the internet? So we think this is an important moment. ACP actually enables us to get the message out on digital inclusion.
If I could add to that, there's actually an interesting philosophical policy debate between whether the ACP was designed to help people who didn't have the internet or was designed to help low-income persons get and stay on the internet. And certainly if you look at the research of my friend John Horrigan and others, this problem of intermittent off and on is a huge problem. but I would just make two observations. First of all, as a matter of law, it doesn't say for first-time users. That's not what the law said. You may try to say that's what the law should have said, but it's not what the law said. And the second point I would make is, and I say this as a former chief of staff who had to think about implementation for all of the policies that we were doing at the time, and the same when we were doing the National Broadband Plan. If you have a program that only goes to people who don't have it, that is almost impossible to administer. You will create all kinds of incredibly stupid incentives. Oh, just turn it off for a moment. Well, that's bad. And you also create these inequities where people of kind of equal economic situations, some are eligible and some aren't. So I'm just saying to people who may have wished it so, number one, you're wrong on the law. And number two, but you make the argument, but you're wrong on the current law. And number two, how do you administer it? And if you can't answer that question, let's go with the program we have that is working to help tens of millions of Americans.
All right, I've got two more questions and then we'll give everyone on the panel a chance to make any closing observations. This one from Daniel Smith says that the FCC has consistently improved the ACP application. Now we need to immediately help the applicants call the ISP. Anil, let's hear again from you about your thoughts on how that last link from improving the ACP to getting them online is working or could be improved.
Well, I'm sure, any ISP that's being truthful would acknowledge that they could do a better job at this, ours included. And so we're constantly trying to refine the process. But, as folks have identified here, there's a lot of hurdles. Administering a program of this size and magnitude certainly isn't easy. And frankly, the speed in which it came online, right, and the amount of folks who are utilizing it, I think we should be sympathetic to the folks that are administering the program and that it is not an easy task. So sure, ISPs could certainly improve in this regard.
All right. The last question from Sherry Lichtenberg. Is it time to start thinking about how to ramp the program down should funding not be renewed? Taking seriously, I guess, the question of, how can we get people on when there's a concern about it? I'd love your reactions to this. And let's actually go in the order we started and close out with your reactions, but also your additional final thoughts you'd like to say in this town hall session we've had about the Affordable Connectivity Program. So Blair, to you.
That is a very valid and painful question. But there has to be an estimate of when the money will run out. The FCC has to tell the ISPs to provide, you could say 30 days, 60 days, 90 days notice that the money may run out. That will cause all kinds of pain and disruption. I think that what you're going to see if you do that is a number of states are going to consider alternatives. The FCC is going to have to, the FCC will undoubtedly call all the ISPs up and say, just keep people on line, give us another year to figure out the budget. The ISPs are going to say no, but I think if you look at what the state of New York did by requiring a low-income program of $15, the ISPs challenged it. It's currently in the Second Circuit. There was oral argument on that in December. You could see other states doing a similar thing. We could get a very fragmented, problematic solution, and it's a real partial solution too. Let me just close by saying, I think somebody said we need to help people understand the importance for rural. There's tremendous data available for each congressional district, and you will find in there exactly what we were talking about earlier, which is the Republican districts benefit from this just as much as the Democratic districts, particularly in the rural areas. And that is something which I think has to get much greater understanding in the halls of Congress and in the public. And Drew, again, thanks for doing this forum.
Well, and make sure to send us a link to that so we can put it on the page for this event, which I'll post again in the links. The video is available immediately afterwards. And thank you, Blair. And let's go to, again, each of our panelists' quick reactions and final statements.
I'll jump in there. I would say no, that this is not the time to be ramping down the program. I agree with Blair. That's a painful conversation, one that I don't think we really want to entertain having. What we've been advising our partners is that it would do a disservice to those who have enrolled and really do damage to the trust that we've built by getting folks signed up to the ACP. It took a lot of trust and work to get folks to where we are right now, and heading in the other direction is not where we want to go. What we've been encouraging our partners and our coalition members to do is to start having those conversations on the Hill, to start applying that pressure. One of the things that I've started saying, it would be great if Congress gave the country a holiday present of renewing the ACP. Like, that's where we want to be come the end of the year. So that's the message that we are pushing for, and that's the advocacy that we'll be pushing for as well.
Amina.
I'll sound like a broken record. It's just critical for everybody to reach out to their member of Congress right now and tell them how important the ACP is to them, to their community, to their organization. There's a unique opportunity before the end of the year with, like Joey mentioned, some of the must-pass legislation. So, whether it's NDAA or the Farm Bill, which comes up about once every 5 years, and this is that 5-year mark, really important moment. I think if we're able to move with one of these vehicles, depending on what it is, you have an opportunity to have it funded for another 5 years so that we're not scrambling, and that we can, have that simultaneous conversation about, now, where does ACP live? Does it, can we reform USF to incorporate something like ACP or some other kind of affordability program? Do we look at Medicaid and or other, non-traditional broadband programs for an opportunity? But first, we've got to address the cliff. So now is the time to reach out to leadership on the Hill.
Well, that's a very tangible takeaway session. Link ACP reform to the Farm Bill. So thank you for being with us and for these points, Amina.
Yeah, I'll just close out on hopefully a hopeful note here, which is that I think Joey mentioned earlier, the ACP has really brought an unusual and large coalition together in some ways, with big ISPs, small ISPs like ours, nonprofits. I'm not aware of an anti-ACP lobby out there. In a rational system, this will be pretty easy. Some might argue maybe we're not living in a rational system now. But, to Joey's earlier point, we've got to make noise, right? We've all got to collectively make noise. The data is out there, it's indisputable, and we just have to educate folks as to, what is going on and the downsides of this. So I'm, cautiously optimistic that all these folks can get together and that we can actually affect some change.
Thank you. Joey, the last word.
You all have a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do. Okay. I'm going to keep connecting folks. I'm going to keep continue to promote the program and require participation providers. And I need all your help to get the fund replenished. We're going to do it, but it's going to take a lot of work, but it is a worthy and essential goal. And so I really appreciate Drew and the rest of the panel for being here, and everyone else for listening on this extremely important topic. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all. And once again, we'll be back next Wednesday at 12 noon.
Audio now on mute. Queue.
And we will see you all later. Take care, and thanks for our panel and for each of you for being with us. Bye, everyone.